Well, hey there everybody, it's Snackbox coming to you from a cloudy and soon to be rainy day here in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm super amped to be coming to you to talk to you about segment 22 of the Colorado Trail. This one, for many of you, will be the start back on the trail after you take a Zero or a Nero out there in beautiful Lake City, Colorado. Get excited about it. It's one of my favorite cities along the trail. Got a lot to talk about, not a lot of time. We're hoping to get this in before the rain starts, so let's get to it. You know, if tomatoes are fruit, does that make ketchup a smoothie? Sorry. So segment 22 of the Colorado Trail starts at the Spring Creek Pass trailhead and goes all the way to the Carson Saddle. Now this one goes 17.2 miles. It goes up in elevation about 3,800 feet and down in elevation about 2,400 feet. Those numbers, like in all the different segments, are really important, but this one is one of those great examples where when you look at the elevation chart in your data book, it's going to look a lot more aggressive than the section actually is. In fact, if you do the math on it, 3,800 miles, what? 3,800 feet spread out over the course of 17.5 miles works out to just over about 200 feet per mile, which is actually a pretty manageable pace going uphill. A lot of this is going to be just a steady grind, kind of climbing, and it's going to be really manageable at this point. Although it will feel in some respects to be a little bit harder than some of the previous segments, because if you just filled up food in Lake City, especially if you're deciding that Lake City is your last stop, this could mean 130 miles from the start at Spring Creek Pass trailhead all the way to Durango. And for many of you, that might be a realistic target after about 7 or 8 days from now. So many of you may decide not to stop in Silverton or not to pick up food at Mullis Pass. So this could be a really good opportunity for you to start making some of those miles. So the good news for those of you who had that plan where you're not going to stop, this is actually really manageable from here because you've got some big climbs coming up through the San Juans, but the first couple of segments are going to be high elevation, but not a ton of elevation rise and fall relative to some of the segments we've done already. So let's get into some of the tips for making your way through segment 22 of the Colorado Trail. And it actually starts all the way back in Lake City. Hold on, my pup is pulling here. She thinks there's some snack. Now, because of where Lake City sits, this is a really important sort of segment if you think about the economy of Lake City, which why would you know anything about that? You don't, but Lake City is sort of a tourist town. So it's much easier to catch a ride into Lake City because anybody driving down the road past the Spring Creek Pass trailhead is going to stop in Lake City. It's almost inevitable. So people seeing you there almost always know that there's an exit point, whereas when you're leaving Lake City, they don't know if you're trying to get back to the trailhead or back to Denver, etc. So it can be a little bit challenging from there. So my first big tip for you is to try to arrange a ride back to the trailhead the day you get to Lake City, especially if you're going to stay the night. This makes it a lot easier to catch a ride back up to the trailhead. In fact, some of the outfitters and fly fishing outfits out there in Lake City will give you a ride back up to the trailhead for a relatively affordable price, and often they'll do it, say, for a whole truckload of people for the same price, around $40 to $60, depending on who you talk to. Another way to do this is when you go into Lake City to try to get that ride back to the trailhead, when you go to set up a hotel reservation in town, there's only one hostel. It wasn't running last year, so there's a good chance you're going to need to stop at one of the local hotels. They're all owned by smaller families and smaller businesses. There are no like Holiday Inns or Ramadas in Lake City. You can actually ask them if they know anybody who lives in town or if they would be interested in driving you up for a small fee if you stay in their hotel. And this is something that I found to be often the case, is really pretty easy to arrange. And when you get to town, you're going to see a lot of other thru hikers. Ask around. Sometimes some other people might have set up a ride with the people who picked them up and brought them into town. They struck up a conversation and said, you know what, the next day I'm going to be leaving, I'll take you back. So don't underestimate the power of conversation and talking to people and asking those people for ways to get back to the trailhead. It's a really good way to go because when you're leaving Lake City, it's just harder to get a ride out of town than it is into town for whatever reason, in my limited experience, which admittedly is pretty limited. Now let's talk about the actual segment itself. So when you get dropped off at the Spring Creek Pass trailhead, one of the things that's nice about this is you can actually afford to start this segment pretty late in the day, because about 8.5 to 9 miles in, you're going to see the Friends of the Colorado Trail yurt off to the right, and this is sort of a marker for you that you're entering this marshy area. It's the last really well-established campsite just off into the brush beyond the sort of marshy area. There is a lot of dead standing trees in the area, but they're relatively new. I camped there a few years ago. I can't necessarily recommend that you stay there, but I can tell you that it's probably the last good campsite until the end of the segment and maybe a little beyond that. This actually works out really nicely though, because because just a mile or so past that, you are going to lift up over 12,000 feet and you're going to stay there for about the next 32 miles, give or take. So you are going to be at very high elevation above tree line for a long time beyond that. So it makes a lot of sense for you to stay at tree line that night and then wake up early and start making your way through that next segment into the high alpine, high elevation segment. So my second tip is to try to camp somewhere near that marshy area, because it sets you up really nicely for the next few days, in fact, when you're trying to make your way through that high elevation segment and do so in a safe way, where basically what you want to do is get most of your big miles in early in the morning and early afternoon, so that if you need to dip down on a side trail to lower elevation, you can absolutely make those plans later in the day without ruining a whole day of hiking and making progress toward Durango. So my third tip is actually a tip that I've already given everybody if you've been following along in my entire Colorado Trail series, and I had a water consideration special where I talked about some of the different areas where you need to be aware of water issues and needs and special whatever you want to call it. And this one has to do with that campsite at the marshy area. So marshy area, obviously that means there's some water running through, and what you're going to see is when you get there, a lot of people are going to stop right at the tree line there where there's an established set of campsites, and then they're going to backtrack into the marshy area and try to fill their water out of this sort of muddy, mucky, kind of just dirty, sediment-filled water, which is totally fine if you treat it. It's absolutely fine. You might have a little bit of grass and leaves in it, but at this point, if you care about grass and leaves in your water, we got a lot of things we need to talk about. However, drop your bag, whatever you want to do, keep walking into that treed area and you'll know it, because there aren't many areas with tree coverage through this whole segment. When you get to this area by just past the Friends of the Colorado Trail yurt, stay on the trail and go up about 150 yards and be listening, because off to the left, you're going to hear running water that's clean and fresh and beautiful, and treat it however you're going to treat it, but it's going to be way better than the water you get if you're trying to get it out of the little mud puddles back in the marshy area. This one is really particularly nice because the next morning when you pack up your tent, you can stock up on tons of water, because there's only one more reliable water source through the rest of the segment, which is about 8 more miles, and then there's not really great water into the next segment either. So you just need to be ready for that. The good news is you are heading into just some of the most beautiful segments of the Colorado Trail. You're going to absolutely love it. This is really one of the best sort of setups for a trail, because you start in Waterton Canyon where there's not a ton of really incredible scenery, and every day you keep walking toward Durango, everything just opens up. It just gets incredible. You start to sleep better. Everything starts going a lot better. You fall into your rhythm. You've made a tramily, if you will, of trail family. At this point, you probably have a trail name, which I know a lot of people are really excited about. It's great. I'm so excited for you making your way through this. And this is a segment that I did twice. I did it ages and ages ago with a buddy of mine who's going to be hiking the trail with me this year. His name's Wayne, so hopefully you'll get to meet him as well. And we hiked from Lake City all the way into the next segment, all the way over to Cataract Lake. I'm going to talk a lot about that in the next segment. It's incredible as well. One of my most favorite spots on the entire Colorado Trail, so get excited about that. Let's talk about the last bits of everything. So hoping that you're going to click like and subscribe. Both of those really help out the channel. And that subscribe button, I want you to think of that as like joining the community, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do here, is build up a little community for people who love the Colorado Trail, love backpacking, love planning adventures. I hope you'll click that button. I think that'd be really great if you join this community. And lastly, you don't even have to follow me on Instagram, but just send me a message on Instagram at Backcountry Champion and say, hey, Snackbox, hit me up with one of those outside comfort zone stickers. I will get them in the mail to you. I have just a handful left, and so I'm so grateful for those of you who have reached out to me. I'm excited to hear people have been getting them. I've gotten some pictures of people sticking them on their gear. Super amped about that. Can't wait to meet all of you out there somewhere between Denver and Durango. So until then, this is Snackbox out. Hope you have a great day, everybody. I'm gonna see you soon. Did I just wink? I did. Pretty soon I'm gonna be that guy giving you like the double guns. I don't know what I'm talking about. Looking forward to seeing you soon.